They really were proud to be building that wonderful ship. It was a big contract. It was really a worthwhile job. Caught the imagination of everyone.
Movie Turn is privileged to show you the first official pictures of the new Cunard, number 534. Like a giant skyscraper, the massive hull rises on the banks of the Clyde. It will comprise 12 decks, the main promenade deck being 750 feet in length.
Will glow with admiration when our new liner leaves the quay.
Songs were written about her. Artists' impressions vied with each other to depict the first 1,000-foot liner in the world. Developing technology had enabled ships of ever-increasing size to ply the transatlantic routes. By the mid-1920s, the Cunard Steamship Company faced fierce competition on these routes, and Cunard calculated they could dominate the market if they offered passengers and the Royal Mail a weekly express service across the Atlantic with 2 ships in operation instead of 3. This was the genesis of the great new Cunard, and designs for it were drawn up early in 1926. And to turn these plans for a massive 1,000-foot liner into reality, Cunard approached the John Brown Shipyard in Clydebank for help. Cunard asked John Brown's to consider the structural and stress implications of the 1,000-foot hull form.
At that early stage, 2 draftsmen were assigned to the work and, in fact, shut away in a back room, as we called it. But such things as the hull form were tested in our experimental tank, which was a facility they were glad to use. Cunard did not know that they could finance the ship. The insurance of the ship was a problem because the London underwriters market could not produce sufficient cover for the approximate estimated cost of the ship, and they sought government help on it.
The specially enlarged berth, on which John Brown's had already spent £176,000 by 1930, still exists, although it is now obsolete. In 1930, John Brown's were busy completing Canadian Pacific's Empress of Britain, launched in June of that year. But after that, there were no orders on the book to keep the 3,500-strong workforce on the payroll. With national unemployment accelerating past the 2 million mark and a world recession tightening its grip, the government in Westminster reluctantly agreed to take up some 40% of the £4 million insurance needed for the ship. The Cunard insurance bill went through Parliament in December 1930, and after 5 years' anxiety, Sir Thomas Bell, the managing director of John Brown's, could sign a contract with Sir Percy Bates of Cunard to build a ship with a number 534, but as yet no name.
Once the contract was placed, in fact, earlier when we started work in May, development work was going on all the time in the drawing office. By that time, it was public knowledge, and the whole drawing office was engaged on work on that ship.
And you had to work to the drawings and tolerances on the drawings. You had to work very strictly to the tolerances shown in the drawings, so that the thing came out, the article came out dead right.
Working in John Brown's could be a family tradition, but only so long as the order book was full.
I was born here on the 21st of May 1913 in 11 Atlas Cottages, Clydebank. My father lived in this house and he worked as a senior foreman boiler maker in John Brown and Companies. The whole family more or less worked in John Brown. My brother was a draftsman, my sister was a tracer, and then I served my time as an apprentice engineer in John Brown and Company Limited up until 1931.
It was company practice at John Brown's of Clydebank for foremen, assistant foremen, and their most respectable journeymen to rent a company house. Company housing surrounded the shipyard not only to the east, but also north in the White Crook district of Clydebank. And because these 12 cottages were always occupied by John Brown's head foreman, they were nicknamed locally the 12 Apostles. In the 1930s, the foreman of the yard controlled living and working conditions for some 20% of the population of Clydebank.
Well, the foreman gave you your jobs for the day, and then he would come around 2 or 3 times to see that you were still at your work. And this was before piecework, actually. The only people on piecework at that time were the riveters, because they could count rivets easily. And theirs was a very heavy job, heating rivets and putting them in wee holes and hammering them away. And that was the way they were employed.
Management was pyramidal, shall we say. There was the shipyard director, the boss, Mr. Skivington, at the top, and down from him came his assistants, and down from that, the head foreman. So therefore the head foreman had 1 or 2 assistants, and then there's a number of under-foremen. The under-foremen were on the staff, but below them came charge hands and leading hands. Then we had journeymen. After that came apprentices. Then came the labourers, or the semi-skilled helpers, and then the labourers who had no trade at all. So it was a pyramid, and it was very, very stable.
On December the 10th, 1931, Cunard gave John Brown's devastating news. Their huge trading losses meant they could no longer finance the ship. The next day, 3,000 of the yard's workforce were laid off.
We were working away, and they posted a notice to say that your services were no longer required as from tomorrow night. And that was you unemployed. We felt as if it was the end of the world. Shipbuilding was coming to an end in Clydebank. That's what it felt like. And we all felt, oh, what is there to turn to? We were absolutely dumbfounded.
Clydebank was dealt a body blow by Cunard's decision. An extra labour exchange was opened in Bank Street to deal with the unemployed, and John Brown's could only afford to keep on the salaried staff and young apprentices. But even they were put on short time.
We actually had 2 weeks off and 1 on. When you were actually doing your 1 week on, actually you get 8 and 6 for that week from the exchange, where actually you only get 7 and 6, I think it was, for your apprenticeship hours, for your week.
And it became fairly grim days eventually, because I remember the bailiffs coming and putting people out of their houses. Most of the people in the company houses, of course, were fairly safe, but people in our private housing, if they couldn't pay their rent, they were actually put out in the street. The furniture was put into their back court, irrespective of what kind of weather it was. Well, they used to have what they called the unemployed band, and they used to, the flute band, you know, and they used to march around the town. Of course, nearly all the children about the place would follow on. But when they came to any place where furniture would be put in the back court, they forced open the door, put the furniture back in again, and moved the people back in, you know. There were grim days in that sense, you know. It was very difficult for some folk.
I had 2 brothers in the yard who were apprentices at the time of the stoppage, but they were kept on because they were apprentices. And in view of that fact, they had to leave the house so that we could claim benefits under the means test. If they had stayed in the house, we wouldn't get anything. So they had to go away and go into lodgings, and it broke up the family a wee bit.
6 months after I was unemployed, you get the postcard to go for the means test to Clydebank Labour Exchange. You went into a room, a big hall more or less, and there were just different platforms, just different sections for each person to speak into, and you just spoke over a counter. And the man asked you some very personal questions, such as, he asked how many are working and what furniture have you got in the house, have you a piano and all this. stuff, and you just felt very personal. In fact, the day I was in, there was a scuffle too along, and the man was very annoyed and he was wanting to punch somebody, but I managed to get through it without any fighting. And we went for a walk, roughly 10-mile walk, to come back to Whitecrook Corner approximately 5 to 12 when the whistle blew for the foreman to come out for their lunch. And you stood there and said good afternoon to your foreman, and then you went for your lunch yourself. The afternoon, 2 o'clock, went into the church hall and we played badminton till about 5 o'clock. And then home for tea and out to the night school till 10 o'clock. That was a typical day in unemployment.
The shipyard sponsored some welfare work in Clydebank, and in February 1933, the government placed a small admiralty contract with the yard. But efforts to restart the 534 were unsuccessful.
The foreman cleaned the hull and painted the hull. Some of the older foremen weren't fit to red lead and scrape. There never was a better painted ship, you know, never. Those men, nothing else to do but paint, repaint, scrape.
I was fortunate in being in the design office at that time, and we continued to work and to discuss design matters with the Cunard staff.
And Davy Kirkwood, who was the MP for Dumbarton Boroughs, kept agitating, when is the government going to help to get the Cunard Company to restart the ship?
Kirkwood's well-known radical views had been regarded with some suspicion by both Cunard and John Brown directors.
Kirkwood used to come into the yard and lunch in the director's lunchroom with Bell and the other directors, Skiffington, with whom he struck up quite a relationship. But Bell was ready to have everybody help him in the campaign at that time and appreciated what Kirkwood was doing.
There was no real organised protest that I could see, and you just more or less had to accept that if people hadn't money, they couldn't buy, and Cunard were in the same position.
For 28 months, the ship lay idle, while the government wrestled with plans to merge Cunard and the White Star Line, both competing in a shrinking market for transatlantic business. The huge hull only needed 5 months' work to be ready for launching on the high spring or autumn tides. But Cunard held out for a 62% shareholding in the new Cunard White Star Company. The White Star directors finally accepted these terms in December 1933, and now the government could advance £9.5 million to the new company. Although £5 million of the loan was earmarked for the planned sister ship, which Cunard White Star also needed to run their express transatlantic weekly services. But £3 million were made available immediately the loan bill went through Parliament in March 1934 to complete the giant Cunarder.
There were 2,000 portholes in that ship. So I remember going up the gangway to A deck and stepping aboard the ship and walking down towards the after end, and there wasn't a sound, not even the sound of footsteps, because we were walking on dust that had collected in 2.5 years that the ship was idle.
As quickly as they had been laid off, 3,500 men were now rehired, most on the same casual basis as before.
Well, I was among the first to get back when she did restart. And my old head foreman sent me for me to meet him. And I met him. He told me the job had turned up, he could give me a fortnight's work. That fortnight lasted to 1960 till I retired.
Marketplace in the yard was where all the riveters gathered. The riveters, the holder-ons, the rivet heaters, they all gathered in one area, and the pipe band played everybody down there.
The people of Clydebank thronged the streets near the yard to watch the Dalmuir Parish Pipe Band play the workers back in to the tune of The Campbells Are Coming.
foreman come down and allocated them all their jobs that day and gave them all where they were to go to. And they spent that first day, I think, collecting all their old tools out of the stores and getting them all ship-shape and cleaned up, ready for start.
So here, riveters, actually, there was machine riveters and hand riveters. And when you heard these things actually in Clydebank, it was a joyous noise because there was work to be had. There was no more actually lying about street corners or in billiard rooms.
The noise of the shipyard proclaimed that the slump was over in Clydebank. And news cameramen were once again made welcome to help generate public curiosity about this enormous ship.
Thousands of steel plates have to be riveted in position, which involves the use of 10 million rivets. Placed end to end, these would stretch a distance of 300 miles.
The labour force was ruled under an iron thumb.
Mr. Donald Skivington was the manager of the yard, production manager, that's what he was. And he was a very portly gentleman with a military moustache and a ruddy complexion and a temper to go with it. Yeah, he had a team of detectives who were much hated men, and they used to probe into everything. If you're walking across the yard, they wanted to know what you were doing and where you were going and why you were doing it. And if you were smoking on the ship, there was a rule that you didn't smoke on the ships. If you were smoking, you were fined half a crown from your wages, and that was quite a bite out of your wages, especially as you're an apprentice.
But there could be no relaxation of shipyard rules and discipline if the ship were to be ready for launching on time. Work had also to be done dredging the riverbed on a line with the east berth of the shipyard.
When the after end of the ship goes into the water, to accommodate it, we had to dredge a deep hole. The ship launched into the mouth of the River Cart, which comes into the Clyde opposite the yard. And that deep hole was extended right up into the mouth of the cart to allow the after end to dip down there at the deepest point of the launch.
It started in April. April it really started. And the launch was on 26th of September, I think, that year, the same year. It was a great day writing up, but oh, the weather was atrocious.
And as I recall, it was a very drab, dirty, rainy day, really dreadful day it was. And it rained from early morning, and the crowds were gathering from early morning. Before we even come into the yard at 7:30, the crowds were gathering. And I got a wonderful view of King George and Queen Mary on the launching platform, and there were a couple of princes with them, I believe.
As a sailor, I have deep pleasure in coming here today to watch the launching by the Queen of this great and beautiful ship.
As yet, no one knew what the ship's name would be.
I am happy to name this ship the Queen Mary. I wish to sail in her.
The Queen pushed the lever and the triggers let go, and the ship moved slowly down the launchways at first, and then gathering speed. Was quite a rattle from the drag chains, and it entered the water, and the drag chains took the weight and turned the ship round straight on to the Clyde, and then 7 busy little tugs come along and hooked up and took it into the basin, and it was there for another couple of years.
For it took 2 years to turn the Queen Mary from a symbol of depression to a symbol of opulence on a grand scale, as work in the fitting-out basin progressed.
Fitting out and decorating the ship is a Herculean task. 6 miles of carpet, 13 miles of fabric, 50 acres to be painted. Little items like these keep an army of workmen busily employed.
It was something to see people line up. You weren't supposed to be on in certain parts of the yard at a certain time, but they all crowded up. It was like a marathon race starting, actually. They all kind of came from all directions and lined. You couldn't go any further than a set position. And when the whistle went, it was just one mad rush to get on the tram cars and so forth.
We were laying deck, as I say, and we were laying it in some lovely locations, round about swimming pools. There were 2 swimming pools, I believe. And we worked in both swimming pools and putting deck round about them and that. It was really lovely.
Our Italian company moved in and they barricaded off their first-class swimming pools. There's no way we could see through. But one actually had, well, they were working away putting this terrace into the swimming pool, and one had come along and he'd knocked a knot in the wood out. And one of the Italians come up and he'd caught this lad looking through this knot hole, and all of a sudden actually there was a strike on their part. They shut down tools and they wouldn't do any more until this was repaired. And there were notices put up to the effect that this was actually a prohibited area.
A few sample cabins were made, and there the Cunard were able to bring their designers and other people to alter the designs, and some well-known designers were involved in the choice.
The design of the public rooms was really handled by specialist architects commissioned by the Cunard. They had their own decorative architect, as we had at Clydebank, and these people collaborated, but essentially there were specialist designers on the work. And then also for the decor of the public rooms, and that's where commissions were given to people like Duncan Grant and the Zinkeisen sisters and others of that standard.
Oh, it's wonderful. The finishing was wonderful. They had a sort of map and a small boat actually on this. They show you Britain on one side and America on the other. And as the ship travels over, this small boat travelled over too. Passengers could tell, well, they could tell at a glance approximately where they were in the mid-Atlantic, you know.
Duncan Grant's commissioned painting did not please Sir Percy Bates and was eventually thrown out of the ship to Sir Grant's great disgust, of course. But, well, the honours were the people who were paying for it, and it was their choice.
All the cabins, actually, the first-class, second-class cabins were out of this world. The main deck, actually, was just like actually being in Harrods, actually, or walking down Bond Street.
Well, it was really a terrific comparison, you know, and the opulence of the Queen Mary and the people that would be sailing in it. You often used to think that, who could afford this, and the 2 different parts of the world to be bottom of the league, top of the league sort of thing.
On March the 5th, 1936, the new king, Edward VIII, paid a surprise visit to inspect the Queen Mary before she left the Clyde.
When the king drove into John Brown's yard for his tour of inspection, he received a tremendous welcome from the workers, whose skill and brains and brawn were bringing the Queen Mary to ultimate perfection, the last word in floating comfort and safety.
They'd cleared one side of main deck, and he crossed a passageway to the other side where I was working with some mates laying deck, and to clamber over some pipes and crates to get there. And we had quite a good laugh at his entourage and all their finery scrambling over pipes and crates to get into line behind him again.
It was a wonderful structure, right enough. I reckon you could get 2 tram cars inside each of the funnels. So they were enormous too. They were built in their own funnel shed. And when they were put on the ship, it just gave the ship that classical appearance. And on top of that, round about the sheer strake, they used what they called panhead rivets, which was stuck out from the shell about this amount. And they gave the ship a beautiful appearance once it was all painted up. You could see all the heads of these rivets. It was really wonderful to look at.
When the long tour came to an end, King Edward walked down the gangway to the roar of another Clydeside cheer and the first blast from the giant siren.
The John Brown workers were acknowledging the concern which the King, as Prince of Wales, had shown for their welfare during the stoppage.
When she left the yard to go down the river, I was actually on board. We were taking observations about the passage, the course she was taking down the river. We had special arrangements to check that she wasn't going too far to the one side or too far to the other. So we were really on board, but I think the whole staff of the shipyard were down at the water's edge seeing her off at that time. It was a very impressive business.
Towering above the landmarks of Clydebank, dwarfing the spectators on the shore, who have come in tens of thousands from the adjacent city of Glasgow, from distant London and from all over Britain, to witness this superb spectacle, the first impression is of her huge bulk, 80,700 tons, and standing over 100 feet above the waterline. She is 1,018 feet long, and from the air you may see how little space there is to turn her in the narrow channel.
It was a wonderful sight to see going down the river. When she come to Beardmore's shipyard, there's a bad bend there, and actually she grounded for just a very short time, and they managed to get her pulled off. But I think it gave them quite a startle for a minute or two until they got it in the move again, you know.
This mishap is not to be wondered at. The amazing thing is that it should be possible at all to maneuver so mighty a vessel drawing 30 feet along so narrow a course.
Despite the ignominy of her final mooring as a tourist attraction in a Californian resort, the Queen Mary persists for all who knew her as an enduring symbol of luxury and style.
They came from everywhere to work in John Brown's, but it was a masterpiece. And to see her sail down the river there, it was something accomplished.
They had finished a job they set out to do, and she would be a success from beginning to end, as she was really a brilliant ship.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. To me, she was the ship of the fleet, yes, yes. I always had a warm heart for it.
And she was a fantastic ship. Fancy that big liner being built with 5-ton cranes, 3.5-ton cranes. Those were the cranes that were in the yard at that time. They couldn't build a ship like that nowadays. Wouldn't know how, man.
British officers will sail you, and your crew will never fail you. Like your builders, they are British through and through. That's why I'm happy and gay, 'cause I'm sailing away. I booked my trip for the USA on the finest ship in the world, the Queen Mary.